My name is Jennifer Fleck, and I recently moved from Houston to Austin. I'm a parent of a 6th grader at Lake Travis Middle School, and I'm going to talk today about what is happening as it concerns human sexuality instruction in public schools. And so about 4.5 years ago, in the fall of 2012, I became aware, as I said earlier, about sex education that was being introduced in middle schools in Houston, and the program or the curricula was called It's Your Game, and I familiarized myself with the content of the curricula and was shocked. I had no idea that you could even say the things that they were saying or show the pictures that they were showing. And so I contacted the media. I made a sign for every single middle school in 15 districts. And either myself or a friend took a sign and we put it in front of every single middle school. And so we went a little bit crazy for a couple of years, but we were successful in Cy-Fair ISD in getting it removed. We got a lot of favor from local politicians and state politicians, and they helped us persuade the superintendent of Cy-Fair ISD to remove the program. So, however, it's still in many districts in Houston, and there are programs like it that are being introduced into school districts all over the state. So as it pertains to sex ed, it's the only high-risk behavior that we encounter such staunch opposition. So, for instance, drinking alcohol is a high-risk behavior. However, the culture and experts and parents agree on the messaging, and it's don't drink. We don't dumb down the message or assume compromise. We teach and preach what is best, what's in the best interest of the child, and what is law. Another example, doing drugs is a high-risk behavior, but culture, experts, and parents agree on the messaging. Don't do drugs. We don't dumb down the message or assume compromise. We teach and preach what's in the best interest of the child, and it's also the law. However, adolescent sexual activity is also a high-risk behavior, but culture, experts, or what I call sexperts, and parents disagree on the messaging. Culture and sexperts pervert the message, push an agenda, and assume compromise. And I'm going to explain how they do this in the public schools and as early as 6th and 7th grade. All human sexuality instruction is taught using 2 methods. And unfortunately, this is a bipartisan issue. It shouldn't be. Best interest of a child shouldn't be a bipartisan issue, but this one is. So the 2 methods are risk avoidance, which is typically called abstinence or sexual risk avoidance, and the other one is called risk reduction. They also call it comprehensive sex ed, which is really good branding, right? Because it's comprehensive. So as a parent, you're like, of course I want them to have all the information. But what you're agreeing to, you have no idea what you're agreeing to. And then the other thing they call themselves is abstinence plus. So the plus is the part that would shock you. So the 2 methods, risk avoidance. Risk avoidance is the method that we teach that certain behaviors are inherently risky, and as a community, we ask students to avoid those behaviors. Avoid alcohol, avoid drugs, avoid harming yourself, avoid gang activity, avoid adolescent sexual activity. This promotes the healthiest outcome, and it's in the best interest of the child, and sends the same exact message to every student without bias, without agenda, or without prejudice. So we're saying the same thing to all children. There's no prejudice. The other method is called risk reduction. And although we do not teach students safe ways to drink alcohol, or safe ways to do drugs, or safe ways to harm themselves, risk reduction actually teaches students safe ways to engage in sexual activity. The risk reduction teaching method assumes that all or most teens from the age of 12 are sexually active and have sexual rights. Rather than teaching students to avoid sexual activity, it teaches students safe ways to engage in sexual activity that include graphic descriptions that aren't appropriate to discuss in this room, but are argued as appropriate for a middle school classroom. I've reviewed the content of about a dozen curricula. The risk reduction curricula have one thing in common. They all violate Texas law for many reasons, but most importantly, it's because their underlying premise is this: teens can engage in safe sexual activity if teens limit their sexual activity to touching and or use a condom. Because this is the premise of every risk reduction curricula, safe sex is their harmful devotion, and devoting more attention to abstinence from sexual activity than any other behavior as the law requires in Texas doesn't happen. Okay, so what I said earlier, they pervert the message, they push an agenda, and they assume compromise. How do they pervert the message? Risk reduction curricula include pornographic videos, and I know that sounds crazy, but they actually include, It's Your Game has numerous videos of teenagers engaging in foreplay and discussing all forms of sexual activity and having a barter and exchange, like if you do this, I'll do that. And these are all videos that are watched during a classroom day by middle schoolers. They also discuss all forms of sexual activity. They include condom cartoons. So it's not just about, so when you say, well, I want my child to know about condoms and protection, I might agree with you, except for they never stop there. It doesn't stop there. They're also going to include what kind of condom to use, what color condom to use, how to put it on, does it glow in the dark? I mean, like crazy, crazy things. And you're like, this is going beyond human sexuality instruction. Now they're perverting the message. They send a confusing message. So they might say at the beginning of the class, this is about abstinence. They say it one time so they can kind of check the box. And then the rest of the hour is not about abstinence. And so at the end of the lesson, you're like sitting there and you're trying to be 12 as an adult, and you're like, I don't get it. It's kind of like math. Like at the end of the lesson, you're like, is this about math? You know, so you're like, this wasn't about abstinence. So confusing messages, graphic definitions, shocking. Like there are curriculums that have glossaries at the back of the curricula where the students can go and look up different words. Shocking. Things I had never even heard of. I was like, that's a thing? So that they're teaching to 12-year-olds. And I have a 12-year-old, so that offends me. How do they push an agenda? The programs direct students away from parents, always. Don't talk to your mom, she doesn't know anything. Dad, he's too busy. Come see us. We'll help you. We'll tell you what you need to do. We'll direct you to Planned Parenthood, which they do in the curriculum. They have slides that actually direct the students to 1-800 numbers that are Planned Parenthood numbers. We'll be your confidant. They direct students to school-based clinics where they don't have to have parents in order to receive contraceptives or testing. Another thing they do is they support gender confusion. So here's an example. Lake Travis ISD allows 2 high school programs. One of the programs is taught by Planned Parenthood. Now, if you're not a parent that does their homework, you wouldn't know that unless you went onto their website. It is on the website, but otherwise you wouldn't know. So parents put their students, sometimes they'll choose the school presents it as abstinence and abstinence plus. So a lot of parents don't know what this issue is, and so they want their children to know about contraceptives. So they put them in that program. This year, last month, in that class, they put up a slide of a profile of a male anatomy, a male body. And the instructor, a Planned Parenthood instructor, said, most of you would identify this figure as a male. However, we do not call this a male because he or it might identify as other. So that just happened last month. So these programs, when they say abstinence plus, the plus you're getting includes gender confusion and supporting gender confusion. They eliminate all mentions of marriage. There's no such word. It's almost like a dirty word. Kind of like abstinence is a dirty word, so is marriage. So they all eliminate all references to marriage. They encourage sexual exploration. So we're not telling the students to engage in intercourse, but these are other ways that as teenagers and middle schoolers that you can pleasure each other and still be safe. It would shock you. The other thing they do is, how do they assume compromise? They admittedly confess that they don't use the word abstinence because it's archaic and not well received. They discuss waiting, but waiting could be wait until you're in high school, right? It's just waiting. There's no defined wait till when. They lead students to believe that everybody is doing it, or soon will be, and they assume students will have sex and emphasize condoms and STD testing. So what some of the speakers have mentioned already is there are private entities that profit from our children's poor choices. And we need to remember that. We need to remember that our child's poor choices feed business models that include abortion providers that are in our schools. Okay, so what can you do? The Texas Education Code provides for what's called a SHAC. It's a Student Health Advisory Council. Every school district has a SHAC. It is supposed to be made up predominantly by parents, and it is supposed to be parent-led. And they're actually the council that selects the human sexuality instruction for the entire district, which most people don't know. And they make a recommendation to the Board of Trustees, and then the Board of Trustees adopts whatever curricula is suggested, typically. But what the opposition or risk reduction proponents have done is they've infiltrated the SHACs. So although parents don't know where this happens, the sexperts do know where it happens. And so they volunteer to be on those committees, and they present to those committees, and then and they present a very cursory review of what their program is. So if I come in and I have a list of pedigrees, right, and I tell you, a parent who doesn't really know the sex education battle, what's going on, you're just trying to volunteer and participate and be a part of the community, you're sitting there as a volunteer, you don't really know what's happening in sex ed. I come in with all my pedigrees and I tell you how bad things are, how many sixth graders are pregnant or sexually active, and I have the solution. And then I tell you, and it's an abstinence solution. But I only give you, just a few things about my program. I don't really tell you the content of my program. And you buy into what I'm selling because you trust me, because I'm a doctor and I'm from UT. And so you trust me. And so I vote to adopt what you're proposing. And I recommend it to the Board of Trustees, who also, for some reason, doesn't know what's going on in sex education, and they also adopt what I'm proposing. And it's not until it's in the classroom that a parent, like a kid comes home, right? Or a parent says, hey, I want to read that, and you actually read what the child is reading. And you're like, no way, this is not happening. And so by that time, unfortunately, however, so many documents have been signed because with my pedigrees, I also bring millions of dollars of federal free money, right? And so I'm giving you this curricula to the school for free So everything's been signed off, everything's been scheduled, and as a parent, you have very little power at that point. It's like the deal is done, and to unwind it is almost impossible. We did it, it has been done, but it's almost impossible. So that's how they get in, and very recently in 2012, so in 2012 is when I got involved. UTPRC got millions of dollars in federal grant money and grant money from Planned Parenthood. They implemented their program, or tried to, in 15 Houston area school districts. In 2015, UT Teen Health received a 5-year, $10 million grant. So they have implemented a program called Direct the Line, Draw the Line, Respect the Line in more than 6 San Antonio school districts. So they go and apply for this federal grant money, and then they come in and they sell it all at the same time. And it's very strategic because they do it all at the same time, because understand, if they did it in just one district, parents would catch wind and they would start telling people, and it might stop it. But they do it all at the same time with all their employees, so it gets implemented all in the same academic year. So it's hard to stop. They're very smart, and we need to be smarter. The results, however, are disappointing, because there are now, okay, so these programs were written 3 and 4 and 5 years ago. The Office of Adolescent Health is publishing evaluations in which they're saying that these programs, It's Your Game, the group that didn't do the program is less sexually active than the students who did do the program. Which I could have told them that. I could have told them that was going to happen. So it's curious to me, UTPRC was pushing It's Your Game 3 years ago. It's the program that they developed. It got a bad evaluation, and now they're using their federal grant money to push a program called Draw the Line, Respect the Line. So I think there's a connection there. I think the reason they chose a different program is because it got a better evaluation. Okay, so in conclusion, I think familiarize yourself as a parent with what your school district is using for sex education. Ask questions. What do we use? Can I read it? By law, they have to make it available. So you want to read the content. Don't believe what anybody tells you. Read it for yourself. Volunteer to be on a shack, right? So if you're a parent and you've heard this talk and I've made you aware, now you can be a volunteer on a shack committee, and when UT or someone comes in and starts selling their perversion, you can say, no, I don't believe that. I want to see the content, not just your summarization, right? Properly vet candidates for school boards. This is a question you ask school board candidates. You say, what's your stance on sex education? Do you believe in risk avoidance, or do you believe in risk reduction? Call your governing representatives in support of parental rights to a grievance process that will allow removal of curricula that violates Texas law. We don't have that. We don't have that for anything. So we have to have stronger parental rights. Senate Bill 855 this year is introduced by Donna Campbell, and it is going to prevent governmental entities from taking state and local tax dollars from private entities that are abortion providers or their affiliates. So we think we can make the link to school districts also, because they're a governmental entity. So support Senate Bill 855. Demand that the reputable University of Texas stop pimping perversion to our school districts. I hate to say something so negative about a university that I'm sure does good things, but this is not a good thing. The SBOE, the health teaks, are coming up for revision this year or next year. I can promise you that these risk reduction people are going to be all in there trying to influence how those health teaks are rewritten. It's so important. Right now, they're good and they follow the law, but I'm already seeing there's a bill that's been introduced where they're asking the SBOE to have jurisdiction over sex education complaints. And the reason they're doing that is they're hoping and planning to change the teeps. I guarantee it. And then last, there's a book that I read that's an easy read. It's not very long, and it taught me so much so fast in the beginning of this when I knew nothing. And it's called "You're Teaching My Child What?" ? And it's by Miriam Grossman, and it's all about sex education and what the different sides are. And it's a great read and an easy read, and it'll teach you a lot. Anyway, that's it. Thank you.